Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We could get you to take your seats. We'll get the program started in just a few moments. Thank you. Terrific. Good evening, everyone. My name is Debbie Ricker. I'm the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Hood College, and I want to welcome you to our beautiful campus tonight. On behalf of President Andrea Chapdelaine, I extend greetings from the Hood community as we're proud to co-host tonight's Quantum Loophole Community Information Meeting with our partners at the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce. Hood has been a proud member of the Frederick community for over 130 years, and we're glad to co-host events like this so that members of our community have the opportunity to learn about projects around our county that have their important questions answered. While Hood remains a neutral partner in the debate, we take seriously our role in providing an environment for education. Tonight's event will be live streamed on the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel for those unable to join us in person here on campus. Tonight, we are joined by Rick Weldon, President and CEO of the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce, as well as 3 members of the Quantum Loophole's leadership team. They are Scott Notebloom, Chief Technology Officer, Richard Paul Huss, VP of Sales and Development, and Bill Williams, Chief Operating Officer. Now for just some quick logistics about tonight's program. The Quantum Loophole team will begin with a brief PowerPoint slide presentation, after which they'll take questions from the audience. A few rules for the Q&A. If you have a question, please make your way to one of the 2 microphone stands positioned in the middle of the auditorium, where Rick Weldon and Helen Profiter will be waiting with those microphones. We ask that you please prioritize your questions, asking them one at a time. And if you have a second question, just please go to the back of the line to ask second or repeat questions, focusing on one question, your priority question at a time. We ask that you keep your questions brief so that we can maximize the opportunity for everybody to get questions asked and answered, and keep your questions to about 90 seconds each or less. And we'll try to conclude tonight's program around 7 p.m. Rick, we're grateful for our wonderful partnership with the Chamber, and now I'd like to turn the podium over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ricker. So I would like to thank Hood for agreeing to co-host with us. We are live streaming the event on the Chamber YouTube channel. I'd also like to thank several of our elected officials and their representatives who have joined us tonight. So let me go through that. I know I have seen Mr. Jonathan Pastor, who works for Congressman David Trone. Jonathan is with us tonight. I'll tell you what, since we're going to express how much we love our elected officials all together, you can hold your applause. I'll give you a signal. We'll give them all a befitting, warm welcome when we get through. That way we don't have to pause and wait for us all to clap our hands individually. I expect that Nan Mann will be with us this evening. I haven't seen Nan yet, but Nan is the Western Maryland Field Director for U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen. I'm expecting Pat Murray. Pat is Special Projects for County Executive Jessica Fitzwater. From our County Council, the President of our County Council is with us, Mr. Brad Young. At-large Council Member Renee Knapp is also with us, and I did see Council Member Steve McKay. Thank you very much. And former Council Member Kai Hagan is with us this evening. So, and certainly not last and not least, my dear friend from Maryland State Senate District 3, Senator Karen Lewis Young is with us as well. Now, you can applaud with all of your might and heart. I thought about what to say to get us started tonight. And I have no illusions about why most of you are here. So let's address that. This is our second community meeting to discuss the Quantum Loophole project. Many of us, some of you that are here with us tonight and others from the Chamber family and the business community, excitedly gathered when Quantum came in and talked about their first tenant relationship with Aligned Data Centers. We were all very excited and enthusiastic when we gathered. But we should also be willing and excited and interested to gather when the news isn't as good. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. You are all familiar, thanks to the FNP, and I think Gabby was going to join us. There she is, to cover this for the Frederick News Post, but you are all very familiar with recent news about some permit issues that have occurred on the project site and the fact that work was stopped as a result of those permit issues. Quantum Loophole has agreed and committed themselves to address those issues very directly with full disclosure. This is not a government meeting. This is a forum that we felt compelled to co-host with Hood College to share as much information as we can share. The team from Quantum Loophole is going to give you a presentation, but they are willing to do their best to provide answers to the questions that you may have. Dr. Ricker referred to the microphones. You see them. Helen and I will be up there to help facilitate that. But the team from Quantum Loophole has committed to be here after the event to address questions. If you're uncomfortable standing up in a setting like this, if you're not like me and you don't live to be on a microphone or at a podium, the folks from Quantum Loophole will be here to meet with you one-on-one or in small groups if you don't feel comfortable walking up to the microphone to ask your question. So we'll try to conclude around 7, but the team will be here to meet with folks or discuss issues with folks that may not be as comfortable with microphones. So I'm now going to stop talking. I'm going to turn the time over to the team from Quantum Loophole. Helen and I will take our places back by the microphones, and then I'll be back as we wrap up to talk about what the next steps are. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming here again. It's been probably a little over a month since you guys hosted this last time, so it's good to be here again, and this is a perfect venue. So thanks to Hood College, and you're a pro in introducing and everything, so thanks to the Frederick Chamber of Commerce. So we're here really to talk about the incident, and we had other plans to give more updates on what we were doing. This takes precedence over those other plans. So what I'll say is as we turn the corner around what I'm going to talk about tonight, I look forward to coming back again later this summer and giving more updates, more introduction, and my commitment is a much more positive message of results. So just like you're holding me accountable tonight to report on what's occurred here, hold me accountable as well for coming back with some positive progress in turning the corner. So what we're going to talk about is for folks that haven't been here before, I have read things in the press. I haven't yet communicated to the press myself at all, but in reading things, there's a lot of descriptions going on in regards to the infrastructure we're building, dewatering activity and what that is and what that isn't. What's happened here and what can we do about what's happened here to ensure it doesn't happen again? And then take your questions and talk about things. So let's do that. My commitment to you is I receive a lot of feedback from a lot of our vendors, from a lot of our advisors of you shouldn't be talking to people until everything is complete and you're all back to work, and that is the right time when everything is cured that you speak to the community. And quite frankly, when the signs went up, which folks who in the neighborhoods that have seen those signs have my name on it. And that was really by my choice. So by default, communication already began with the community. So I feel we owe the community a response quicker than that. So here we are. Now that being said, we have a really good understanding of what happened here. there's a lot of exciting speculation. There's a lot of things that could make this incredibly compelling from a technical perspective. The reality is it's pretty stupid. And pretty stupid is pretty embarrassing, but oftentimes stupid is easier to heal. So I'm going to talk about that, and then we're going to go into Q&A, and I'm going to reveal as much as possible. Keep in mind there are going to be some areas, because the audience here, you guys are holding me accountable and I'm standing here, but realize that we work with a lot of partners and a lot of things, so while we have a good understanding of what occurred here, the actions that we're looking to take and will be taking relative to things, you know, there's a lot of ramifications around those actions and potential legal issues and so on and so forth. So my commitment to you is to talk about as much as I can to be able to intention, give the community comfort that to understand generally what happened, understand enough of what happened, and then understand based on what happened, these actions that we're taking can make the community feel one step closer to being more comfortable and rebuilding our credibility, that we can recover from this incident in our relationship. So relative to what we're building, so that the construction project that was under construction and is now in halted construction is really a municipal improvement project to enable what eventually will happen in this community. So last time you heard from Align Data Centers and some of the exciting things they're doing, that's an example of kind of what happens next. But in the meantime, this is what needs to happen before what happens next, and it really involves improving the infrastructure of the community. So I was in a meeting earlier today, and the topic had come up where, you know, our community is going to be funding the cost of, you know, improving everything to support data centers, the cost of improving the grid. Is that cost a cost that the community and the taxpayers are responsible for? And the answer is no, we're building this community infrastructure. We're actually upgrading the utility grid, and that actually is all on our costs. So as a community, when we do things right, how do we upgrade our water and sewer infrastructure, not just for the data center community, but the community overall? That's good for the broader community that's funded by our industry. Renewable energy and concerns there. A lot of what we're going to work on with the working group, which I'm really excited about the county has formed, is the industry is going to be funding the modernization of the electrical grid in this region, effectively of not only the county, but the state and the region of the country, in order to deliver 100% renewable, ultra reliable, ultra scalable, low cost energy. So where we have to work together is let's make sure that when the industry builds that, it's of mutual benefit for the community. So to step back for a second, in addition to funding the electrical infrastructure, which I'm not talking about today, which we are funding, these are the things that we're actually funding, which are the property of the taxpayer, okay? So we're building 2 new roads. So Quantum Place South comes off of Manor Woods Road where the top arrow is, and it goes down. From the distance perspective, that would be less than a half mile, and goes to a cul-de-sac, and there's, you know, trees, and there's bike lanes, and there's a turnaround, and there's a nice little park area in the center of that big cul-de-sac. That eventually leads to a bridge that is not going to be built in this phase, but in the future. Currently there's a culvert crossing that originally exists there. So we're building that road completely. And then secondary to that is we're going to talk about dewatering and sewer. This is where the sewer pumping station is, and I'll point that out in a second slide. This road here that comes off of New Design Road basically runs down in this direction, and what we're building now is simply a service access road to be able to properly service that sewer pump station, which is, again, an asset of the county. Eventually, what will become is that will be called Happy Landing Road, and that'll eventually down in time become a road. But initially, this service driveway that's designed to grow into a road in Quantum Place South is what we're building, and that's what began in construction. So we're building public water infrastructure, okay? And the important thing to understand here is we're building two separate systems. One is a domestic system, and the domestic system in its eventual state is designed to accommodate domestic needs. Flushing toilets. I've been calling domestic water drinking water to make a point that one of our objectives that we're doing here is drinking water really shouldn't be used for the data center industry. Drinking water is for people, or domestic water. And so we're building a secondary system that's designed to accommodate industrial cooling that we're preemptively putting in the ground to support the cooling water infrastructure, which is using properly treated wastewater, effectively sewage water, for the industrial cooling of water so that we're not using people's drinking water. So that's one of the innovative things that's progressing here. That's a longer term construction project, but we have to put all of that piping in place. So along the blue lines that you see here is the current phase of construction's water lines that connect to the utility, the existing utility, pretty darn close around New Design Road. Yes? The color blue? Oh, I can. They're to differentiate land bay. So to be honest with you, they're used for internal use. So internally, what originally was called land bay A, and if we go into like where the letter B is, and we go to the north of the road, that actually is where a line is going to be, who spoke to us last. That also, where the orange box is, that's where the substation is going to be. So for people who are familiar with the East Alco history, that's generally where the East Alco substation was. The 300 parcels, as we call it, we just have numbers against the parcels. This is what lines Happy Landing Road. So in the yellow section, those are the 100 parcels. On the other side, which I'm not showing because it's not applicable to the presentation, are the 200 parcels. That's for, if you look at our preliminary plat 201 through 204, that's for the future. The 300 parcels are along Happy Landing Road. The 400 parcels are along the turquoise color. And the 400 parcels are part of what was approved in the second preliminary plat. And what you'll find is these parcels here are not, this parcel here, I should say, is not applicable for, or zoned for data center use, so that's segmented differently. But the simple answer is we color them different because they're the 100s, 200s, 300s. The green is the open space. So the important thing so it's not only the open space, but it's also this property here is the Manor House property. And as an FYI for community meetings going forward, and I would say the challenge is we can't host as many people. The cool part is that the Manor House is actually really cool, and we just did a lot of cleanup work on it. So we are this summer going to begin having smaller community meetings at the Manor House. We think that's part of being a good neighbor, is come to our house. And so that's where the Manor House is. An important side thing to note, the green is all open space. That's where we're creating forest conservation. That also is where the creek is. What we're going to talk about today is that also is where some of the dewatering activity, or the dewatering activity specifically, was taking place. But the intention of that land is to keep it to nature, plant trees, accommodate our FRO requirements for forest restoration, exceed those greatly. And the good news on that one is the majority of that land is industrial zoned. So, you know, we're taking this you know, it even extends north there, but call it approximately 500 acres, and actually returning that to forest. So that's what the green is. So related to dewatering, this is the infrastructure that we're going to talk about tonight. So as I had mentioned, remember Happy Landing Road comes down this way. This dot here is the sewer pump station. So just why, if you really want to understand what happened in dewatering, dewatering is applicable to this infrastructure. So if you want to really understand how sewer infrastructure works, is the red lines are called sewer outfalls. And specifically sewer outfall A is where dewatering activities were occurring that I'm going to talk about tonight. Dewatering activities are also in this section of E. That's where the sewer pump station is. One of the things that I didn't include, and now I'm regretting it, is when we talk about the environmental covenant, there actually is an environmental covenant area, and there's a soil management area. And to put in perspective, giving my best shot of not being tall enough to trace, but the environmental covenant, the soil management area is a portion, largely the southern portion of the yellow, okay? And really what that means is we have very strict requirements for how we handle soil in that location. It requires a 2-foot soil cap. There's requirements from a brownfield management perspective that we have to abide to. The environmental covenant area, and by the way, the soil management area is more directly related to where the former East Alco factory was. And the environmental covenant area is really an expanded area of that. And the environmental covenant area largely consumes that yellow area that you're talking about. And it also extends further south along the creek down into here. So when we talk about the environmental covenant, and we talk about environmental covenant areas and otherwise, the sewer outfall A, where we were doing dewatering, involved areas in the environmental covenant, which I'm going to introduce and talk about. The sewer pump station is outside the environmental covenant area. So I apologize, I should have had a map for that. But the way the sewer system works is crap runs downhill. So the red lines is really where you have the flushing toilets as example. This all runs using elevation and gravity. So they're gravity-fed lines. They run down the basin of elevation to the low point. That's the sewage pumping station. The sewage pumping station has effectively a big well. This is how all of our utilities work generally in the community. And as that well fills up, you have what's called a force main. And the job of the force main is to pump it back uphill. And this pink line is what goes up and connects to the existing sewer infrastructure of the county. So this area very specifically refers to where we were working and where we ran into what we're talking about tonight. And you know, when you ask why, water piping versus sewer, in sewer, in order to accommodate the run downhill, this sewer piping, the water piping is much shallower in the ground. The sewer piping in many places has to be much deeper. So the sewer piping, I think we calculated, gets as deep as like 19 feet deep into the ground. And what you find is generally in this area, particularly when you're along the low elevation side of things, and I'll explain kind of how groundwater, surface water works in the future. When you go that deep, generally greater than, say, 15 to 17 feet, you do run into groundwater, where in everything else related to roads and water and even our network and such, you don't run into that depth. So through this scenario, a common question that I get is, well, what about this groundwater stuff in the future? And I guess I'll say fortunately, it's really sewer that needs to go that deep to accommodate that gravity run downhill, that really all of the other things that are being built rarely are going to go to that level. Beforehand, we had anticipated and modeled, based on all of our testing, where groundwater was going to be encountered. And we did in all the areas of the site. And we did project that properly. So generally, it's in those areas of lower elevation, depths 15 to 20 feet. So this is the sewer infrastructure. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly because we had already talked about it. The green areas is where we're introducing our forestation. And just quickly what we're doing there is one of the things in Frederick County that's pretty neat is and as a matter of fact, I met with Mr. George, who's on the data center committee, yesterday. And one of the things that he did really well for the community is the framework of the Forest Resource Ordinance that really says that if you're going to develop a property, you have to take about 15% of the property and put forest on it and protect it under conservation that the county manages. So this is all the areas I'd mentioned we're doing forest restoration. We're taking it to a next level because we believe that a true forest has undershrubs, ground cover. So we're looking to take that to another level. Different meeting to share that relative to nature reserve, but it's really those areas. And then the other thing we're doing is the pre-work regarding a community bike path. And the reason it's a pre-work is that bridge at the very top that I had mentioned, as well as the roundabout, including, where does exactly this come from? This is actually going to end right here initially, and it's not going to be a real road, so we can't complete that. But part of the scope is that preliminary work of starting to get a lot of that pre-work done. So this is the scope of what we're building. The substation, we're actually not building the substation. That's First Energy who's building that. We're funding the creation of that, which includes the substation as well as some upgrades to their core infrastructure upstream of that. But that's really their project. And I won't talk about that today, but I can answer questions with what I know. This is normally my brag slide. This is my we're the best slide. This now has become the we're the best slide, but we're not perfect. We're Quantum Loophole. From a qualification perspective, we have led projects including brownfield remediation projects on almost all continents throughout people like myself's career. We have big success in doing so. I've never encountered a failure of successfully revitalizing a brownfield. It's something that is one of the hardest things to do, but also one of the most satisfying things to do. This project will be the most meaningful brownfield remediation that I will have done in my career, though. And so relative to turning that around and re-underlining the commitment of we're fulfilling a hero's journey story of revitalizing what epitomized post-World War II pollution, taking on the accountability and responsibility for that, which I'll tell you right now, it feels heavy standing up in front of you, and turning that into something that creates an international story of how do you transform a dirtier past into a shining example of what modern green industry is. I stand by that. We're going to deliver that, and nothing changes in that regard. So STO Building Group Structure Tone. Structure Tone is the #4 builder in the eastern US. They do about $10 billion in projects. and I think is the number 3 in the region relative to brownfield remediation. That's why we hired them. They also were responsible for delivering some of the most innovative data center solutions. We're actually not building data centers here, but we have a track record of doing that. Alex, who's a new member to our team, him and I had worked together on some of that stuff as well. So delivering pretty energy saving things that have gotten pretty high regard from Greenpeace and others. Structure Tone was behind that, so we know them. Patillo, who has a presence in Maryland, is one of the, not only the biggest, but the most technologically advanced movers of dirt, site and civil engineering, in using automated machinery that's precisely GPS enabled. They're about as good as it gets in this part of the country, if not the entire country. Clark Construction. Clark Construction, I think, is number 6 or 7 in the eastern US in regards to builders. I think they do about $6 billion, $5 billion a year. They are much more local. Structure Tone's in New York. Clark are local Maryland folks. And again, have a beautiful record of being able to fulfill what we need to fulfill here. From an engineering perspective, in my diligence, this is my first project in Maryland. In our diligence, I think GTA is the most regarded, well-regarded environmental manager consulting firm in these parts. And not only that, but a lot of the years of work on this particular project in leading what I'll say is a pretty impressive remediation of this site, particularly as we've continued to measure levels and seeing that MDE working with the right players, with engineers like GTA, the results, looking at the data of what things look like, 20 years from now to today, really underline why we hired GTA. I think they're the best at it. Rogers Consulting, Rogers are our local folks. They've been a massive benefit. They have experience in the area as well. Dewberry would be a more specific engineering firm. That is our secondary, and again, one of the bigger, more successful in the region. So when it comes to my job is, at the end of the day, I'm one person that relies on hundreds of people with very many areas of subject matter expertise to deliver. And we did a good job on this one. This is, I think that it's debatable, but this is one of the best teams that could be built in this area of the country. They're not perfect, they're great. The environmental covenant in the EMP. One of the most common questions, which I think is a very meaningful question, that has been asked of me, that has been asked of my team, that has been asked of all of those players. Do you guys understand the environmental covenants and the EMP? Did you receive those documents? And did you read those documents? So the answer is yes. That's in addition to saying we're not perfect, to acknowledge that the answer is yes, absolutely. All of that was made very clear from all of the partners and the regulators and the state people and the county people. Everybody knows. How could you not know? Look at the history of the site. So what I wanted to say here, just to be ultra clear, is we absolutely understand the environmental covenant that was released, I think, in October 2017, that was back in the East Alco days, that define kind of the ground rules of how to operate on this site, that I think GTA actually helped with. We're intimately familiar with that. The environmental management plan, which is more a project-specific set of rules, specifically to what we're doing in the scope of this project that I just showed you. That was approved in March of this year. And yeah, we understand it. Relative to our contractors, we go through all of this stuff when our contractors are coming on board. And the reason it's really important is environmental remediation projects are the most fulfilling project you can do. They're also incredibly difficult that you have to build the right team against. Because we specifically built our team to have specific experience in being successful with a deep track record of success amongst all those logos that you saw. And I think any research you do should validate that. Everyone is aware of all of this. Everyone was issued those documents. Everyone was aware that these issues had to be followed. To state that very clearly and humbly. So our dewatering, there's a lot has been said related to discharging directly into the creek, releasing chemicals, various chemicals. Dewatering is not incredibly complex, but it is something that's essential. So let me explain what we were doing, and then let me clarify a little bit with the environmental covenant, just so we understand and are clear. When something, and I use an excavator, we're using excavators. When you dig a hole, it's 19 feet deep, so it's more than a ditch, it's a trench. And there's a lot of safety ramifications. It's interesting, just like environmental safety becomes mission critical in this kind of thing, we also have to choose vendors that way. But we dig this trench, and this machine would have started digging this trench way back here. And this is really, I think they call it a borrow pit dewatering. So what happens is we dig this hole, and then like I said, right around 15 feet, when we're not 15, 19 feet, we don't run into groundwater. And I'll talk a little bit about what groundwater, I think I may have it on another slide, but when we encounter groundwater, we can't put our pipe and do our connections underground in a quality fashion or even in a safe fashion. So we have to do temporary dewatering, which really means we dig, we pump the water out of the groundwater table to empty the ditch of water. We put the pipe in, we put the dirt back into the ground, and we move down the line. That line was that sewer outfall A that I was talking about. That's specifically the line that I was talking about. So this action would move this way. Now, a very standard way of dewatering, and when I say our dewatering, this is what is happening here, is we're putting effectively a hose in the ground. We have a pump. We're pumping that water out of the trench to be able to clear it of its water. It's going through a pump, and then what we had is a standard dewatering, basically a recharge area, okay? So what we had here is we created a basin that is lined and is surrounded by hay, and then you have what's called a filter bag. And let's not overinflate a filter bag because we're going to be talking about fluoride numbers. The filter bag is not there to capture fluoride. The filter bag is there to capture sediment. And so what happens is the water goes through here. The sediment, which is effectively muddy water, the mud and the dirt and the sediment remain in the filter bag. The water comes out the sides of the filter bag. The intention is to recharge the groundwater table and send that into the ground. And that's the method of procedure that was followed. Okay? Let me pause for a second and think of what's important here. The water was not directly discharged to the creek. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's a true statement, but it's important to understand. So, and then I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about, generally talk about containerization and characterization. So, water flows downhill. So if we look at where I said higher elevation and recharge, this is, you know, could be an area, and this is just a general drawing that explains different dynamics of water. And so what you'll see is groundwater generally, and every lay of the land is different. This is a general drawing. Groundwater is what we encountered at that 15 to 17 foot level. This is how groundwater generally works relative to the elevation of land. Surface water is water on the surface that runs downhill, okay? So when you put water on the surface, just like all of us know at home, if we run our sprinklers, it's going to go into the ground until the ground is saturated, and then it's going to go somewhere else. And somewhere else generally is downhill, which will go to other ground, become saturated, and go. That can go all the way to the creek. Okay, so nothing was directly discharged. The state of effectively the soil on the ground can influence what ends up going somewhere else outside of that dewatering plane. And largely what can influence that, I'll just name two things, is after we stopped everything, geez, time has gone crazy. It's either last week or the week, I think the week before, Alex, the rain. So we dealt with major rain activities, and we were actually concerned of how that could affect our halted construction and just the integrity of everything, and you know, any potential ramifications. Working with our partners, we were all over that. I think everyone did a good job. When the rain saturates things, had we been doing dewatering, then a greater ratio would end up running downhill, and that's a standard process. The saturation of the ground, that determines the percolation rate. That also determines things. Keep in mind, some of these are on low-level areas, floodplain areas, and those kind of areas, a greater ratio can go towards the creek. So to clarify, no water was directly discharged to the creek. That's how water gets into the creek. To explain, and this, I'm going to get into a method, a procedure that was humanly distributed, and potential documents that looked like they were acceptable, that were not marked draft, and were distributed through the team, created this miscommunication that I'm talking about. The misunderstanding results are fairly common because the way dewatering was done is a fairly common way. That is a terrible misstep that was in our team when this happened. So containerization and characterization, what that means for folks that may ask is post-pumping, you would pump into a container. And that container would be, you know, anyone who looks over the fence, and let's say we have frac tanks right now on site. So we have 27,000 gallons of frac tanking that's sitting on the site that we're actually going to be increasing. It goes into that tank, and then you test the water from the, so that's containerization. You test the water, that's characterization, and then you deal with the water accordingly based on those results, which could be exactly this, or if something's bad, you can discharge the water off-site or via other means. So that is the difference a little bit between different approaches to dewatering, which is really important to understand. So environmental sampling, a lot, I didn't ask my partners to confirm, but like GTA could probably, this is probably the most tested site in Maryland, just being of its history and its size. We did extremely thorough testing of many dynamics before we bought the site, after we bought the site. Before we began construction, we had to do what's called our environmental phase 2, that were pretty extensive soil, sediment, surface water, as well as some groundwater testing. So that testing was done in the September 2022 timeframe before things began. After all of this unfolded, in the way it unfolded, what I'm not proud of is previous to the 22nd of May, we felt all of our experts were doing their job. And on the 22nd of May, it was MDE that had reached out to us and said, hey, we have a problem, you have a problem with dewatering, and we stopped. And that's when we first learned of that. So what I'm not proud of is, why did we even get to that point, which is what we're working through right now. But what I am proud of is we responded immediately. And when I say we, it's the entire team. The contractors I showed you, all the partners in the county, the partners in the state, everyone we've worked with, I think really has taken on a major burden in what's happened here. And it shows. Everyone is putting in the efforts. And that's the area that I'm proud of. So part of those efforts was on, May 22nd, we heard things were not right with dewatering. MD asked us to stop dewatering. We stopped dewatering. By close of business, from where I lived, I had heard on the 24th what was happening, and we stopped construction because things were not sounding good. On the 25th, things weren't good. We received a disapproval of the environmental management plan, which is a critical part of our project because of what happened. We immediately, and I think after hours, to their credit, began to dialogue with all of our players in the state, and we discussed that no matter the case of pre-testing, confidence, history of remediation, because of this confusion here, there's a potential risk that something bad happened here. And it was suggested that we should hang up signs warning the community, which some of you may have seen. I and Selena, who's our admin, God bless her heart, have been taking a lot of those calls. And it's again, something that is a humbling experience. But along those lines of things, that was suggested on Friday. Saturday morning, we immediately put up the signs. It needed to have a QL name. You see my name because I'm the person who comes up on the stage in the last meeting and talks about all the great things that I'm proud of. I take ownership and I take accountability for resolving this issue, and there's no better way. I'm not going to put any of my other teammates' name on those signs. That's why my name is on those signs that referred to us. We tried to provide as much information as we can, but there was a lot of work, and we had to trust the real experts, which is the people from the state, to come up to their determination, and they put in a heck of an effort along with us. I'm sure all of us wish that could be faster, but it was very diligent. So we did a lot of sampling. Initially, we started to sample on site under the guidance of MDE. Under the supervision of MDE, we took incredibly, I don't want to say incredibly, it's not we took a lot of sampling from the top of the creek all the way to the bottom and the confluence of the Tuscarora. We took samplings in regards to the water that was in our piping that came through from the groundwater, the rain, everything that we could test, we tested. In addition to, the traditional characterization, which would have had us be testing for fluoride, This was serious. We had to test for a lot of things, and under the guidance and supervision of MDE, we look for VOCs, PCBs, metals, other form of chemicals, not just our advisory chemical of, or compound of concern, I would say, because it's natural, of fluoride. So that was completed. It took more time than any of us would like, and we did receive those calls of, when can you provide guidance? My farm animals are drinking that water. As quickly as we can, we waited and received the information from MDE and the county health department, who moved as quickly as they can. This was a lot of information that they had to deal with related to what happened on our project. So results were determined. They were very extensive, and no adverse impacts to public health or the environment were discovered. What we were also happy is in that preliminary kind of pre-construction testing that's in our environmental phase 2, the groundwater location that is in the same region of where we were doing the sewer outfall, that tested at 0.25 milligrams per liter. To get too deep into the weeds, the safe drinking water level for fluoride is 4.0 milligrams per liter. It was 0.25 in that place in September before anything started. In similar area that was tested after the fact, it was similar in along things from ahead of our property all the way to the base of the Potomac. Our experts determined, our experts meaning our community experts, not ours, that everything was safe and there was no impact to public health or the environment, which is very good. That is what we expected. But again, if there is any potential of causing harm or any potential of causing contamination, my name's going to be on those signs. And I take accountability for that. What happened? And I'm going to share as much as I can because the actions against what happened are going to be something that continuously moves on. I'm here. I'm taking accountability for all of my contractors, all of my engineers, all of my advisors, all of my contractors and subcontractors. And it's our job to vet out adjustments that we make ourselves that, like I said, could be long-standing, could involve legal issues. I don't know even at this point. So I'm going to share what I can. So there was a miscommunication on how to do things that was incorrectly communicated, incorrectly assumed, I guess, from the other perspective, that resulted in a misunderstanding that resulted in, yeah, this is the way you do dewatering. It's a very standard practice, and that's what happened in this method of procedure in dewatering. It's a lot of research that ends up being a really simple reason that fortunately, I'll say, to resolve that issue is pretty straightforward. I'm in the mission critical business, and if you have a machine that's mission critical, if my pacemaker stops, I'm dead, or my lights turn off in my data center, I'm going to have redundancy in place. That if anything screws up, I'm going to have a redundant system. N+1, one layer of redundancy. N+2, two layers of redundancy. Interestingly enough, that's the world I come from. Not only do I know the environmental covenants and the environmental management plan, I know that like the back of my hand. So instilling redundancy is what we do. In the reality in the data center world is human error is more prevalent than machine failure. We obsess over redundancy in machines. Instill redundancy that if there's a misunderstanding and miscommunication, we have someone on site that is there to overlook the shoulders of everyone from an environmental compliance manager. That's an action that we've taken. That person is on place. What I will say as well, we'll call it a broader lesson of, that actually ties to post-COVID, is what I will say, and it's a lesson that definitely is underlined in my world, is, so from a program management perspective, we have multiple things, multiple projects and such going on in Frederick County. Let's have a program manager on site who's responsible for all projects. Why is on site important? And I'm speaking someone who lives on the other side of the country, is in the investigation, I think what you find is it almost becomes, I think we are calling it like a technical divorce or a technology divorce. When you receive 834 emails in the day, and you're on 14 Zoom calls, and you're sitting in your underwear in your bedroom, it enables you to divorce yourself from, I got boots on the ground on site, and I'm specifically looking at what's going on, like many people were, but relative to that program management and that diligence, having that on-site presence, we also think is key. So that's an additional action. So the environmental covenant and the EMP, as I said before, that's the Bible. There was misunderstandings in the Bible, miscommunications of the Bible. We did our job of hiring our vendors specifically because we had to follow the commandments. Yet the best were not perfect. So in addition to causing at a high level, as part of our relationship, hey, these are the environmental covenants, these are the EMP, we're developing a training deck that every single person who works on the site has to go through and acknowledge, every employee, that they have reviewed this information, they're aware of the environmental covenant in the EMP, and they have that understanding. Again, to underline the importance of that. Now that we have somebody dedicated on site full time, whose only job is to watch over everybody and everything, let's see some increased reporting that again obsesses over that point and is analyzing and looking at everything from a critical eyes perspective. We now have more information. We can now communicate better to all of our relevant agencies in the community that we're doing much more extensive look at this, and we're doing better. Number one, I didn't miss it. Containerization and characterization. One of the things in stopping our construction project that we had to do is we put a lot of pipe in the ground, and groundwater runs through that pipe, and rain can hit that pipe, and we had to do a lot of remediation items to make sure that that piping doesn't fill up with water and overflow, because that can go places that we wouldn't want it to go. So what do? We deployed containerization that then we can do testing against. The unfortunate part of this whole thing, and it's interesting when you go back through all of that confusion and misunderstanding, in all of that miscommunication, misunderstanding, there were good questions of, hey, how do we do this? Specific details that unfortunately got lost in translation. Containerization and characterization is pretty easy to do. We deployed 27,000 gallon frac tank almost immediately. Deploying 100,000 gallons of storage capability, really easy. All this testing that we did, really easy. If humans were a little bit more perfect than they were, containerization and characterization, compared to what we're doing and the impact to our business, the cost ramification isn't even worth discussing. It's nothing compared to the big picture. The timing ramification would not have affected the timing of our schedule. we're proceeding with full containerization and characterization moving forward. We're proceeding forward with doing a revised EMP that I think everyone is going to want more stringent and more precise details and requirements. And we're going to comply with all of that. And these things are going to be the pieces of a foundation built around the premise. If nobody's perfect, redundancy is the only option to be able to ensure that this never happens again. Thanks.
With the promise at the outset, these microphones are here for you to ask questions if you have questions that you'd like answered. Scott has committed, along with Rich and Bill, to do their best to answer your questions. So we'd like to give the time to you now. Just come on down, Sierra. I'll bring it to you.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to start off with, is MDE here tonight?
So MDE did register, but we weren't expecting them to.
They're saying they're right here, Rick.
Yeah, there was an aspect of this that I discussed when you were at our council meeting, and I was hoping to hear more about it tonight. In their inspection reports, MDE mentioned dewatering, 3 separate reports going back to February 22nd, right? And so you're acknowledging your failures here. I'd like to understand what MDE's lessons learned are from this, because I was a little disturbed that MDE wasn't coming to you as early as February 22nd, rather than just benignly noting it in the inspection report, but actually telling you what the requirement should be.
Yeah, and also to clarify on something, because what, I saw what was put in the press, and to clarify, I never have spoken to the press, and, 2 things: people can translate differently, or people like me can not be clear in communication. And so, what I want to say, just to clarify that, and anyone can speak, by the way, that they would like to, but it's MDE that did discover this situation. And it wasn't these team of all-stars that I've shown. So I do want to point that out. The other thing that I want to point out is, when I spoke to you in the organization, speaking of bureaucracy, this, that, and the other thing, I think some of that could have been misconstrued. And one of the things I wanted to be really clear about is, when it comes to the cause of this issue that I went through, MD had nothing to do with the cause. So when I say bureaucracy, it's interesting, because when I heard feedback on that, I went and read it in the dictionary, and I thought that, and I saw that it referred to specifically to government, and I'm all, no, I was talking about bureaucracy amongst our groups. And when I refer to like the teams that we work with, surely MDE, the county, these are the folks that we partner with, that we're here to follow the rules with and everything. That doesn't mean anything from a negative sense. So just to be like ultra clear, everything that we went through, this was teams that worked under my leadership. And when it comes to identifying that issue, it was MDE who identified that issue. So I appreciate that, but I just want to give credit where credit's due.
Next question.
Yes, thanks for coming. I'm glad you're having this session. I do have, though, a question which has to do with the fact that on a project like this, risk is all over the place, right? And it's going to be also in future stages. So in hearing all the information you've provided, it raises the question of a risk management plan. And what you had in the beginning, obviously, we've learned from some of the measures you're taking, there were deficiencies, right? There were things that you yourself have identified, right, and have made improvements. But I'd like to know, moving forward, And as you move into other stages, building confidence for the community that that's going to be a robust risk management plan moving forward, and that perhaps this community needs some metrics or some information that flows out of that process that can reassure us that, in fact, that kind of implementation is happening. Because I think it's not just, it's great that you've put people on the ground, but I know from my own personal experience, and I've run teams of 10 subcontractors, you need to be getting regular reporting on a pretty high frequency basis if you want to get best outcomes in risk reporting. So I'd like to hear what the possibility of that is, if you're dashboarding, if you're how is this information rising to top decision makers, right? So that you can identify ahead of time, proactively, right? In a proactive management way, so you can mitigate ahead of time.
Yeah. So one of the things of keeping this backup or redundant person who's full-time on site, whose really job is to obsess over this issue of keeping them busy and focused, is that routine weekly reporting of exactly what happened, pictures of what happened, data related to what happened, and any red flags that that person sees, because this isn't going to be the person who's actually doing any of the work. This is the compliance manager whose job is to analyze and report on it. So I'm right with you there. And one of the good questions, so there was in the county council meeting, I had committed to in writing, which I actually really appreciated, because it enables, I said earlier, I'm one person who have hundreds of smart people working in many different areas of subject matter expertise. That makes me much dumber in you know, those specifics. So being able to work with the experts and giving those answers has been really helpful. And one of the, actually two of the questions revolved around, you know, are you willing to share aerial footage in regards to what's happening in the site? And the second is are you willing to have routine meetings that give an update on what's going on? And so what I'll say is yes, continuing, I feel like I hope that I'm a welcome guest at Hood College, because I think that this environment is really good. And the fact that this can hold, if it needs to, 400 people, and it also enables live streaming, this is a special place to be able to do that. And so if we can establish that routine that we've already begun in the last meeting with Aligned and continue that, I would be super happy to summarize those report and that information as we communicate to the community. I'd be happy to do that.
And I also think another important component of any risk management plan, when you find those red flags, is someone's initials who owns it, okay? And who is responsible in a certain time frame, right, to report back what that progress is and whether it needs to be elevated and have more individuals involved to spearhead whatever resources are needed to get it resolved. So it would be great if you also found a way to communicate with the community, whether that's through a metric or some simplified reporting, so we could understand how things are moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think reporting that as we give routine updates, I think we can follow up on all of that, which I think is beneficial for everyone, because again, my job is to transform what's occurred here so that we can give good information that rebuilds credibility and trust and all those things. That's really important to us. So I think that's good feedback. We'll take it. It's nice that we have somebody hired now on board in Frederick County that's working on site that can put in the resources to do that, because we're going to see the data as well. Thank you.
You have someone next? Okay, you're next.
Just a quick question about the person on site. Are they going to be working for Quantum Loop or a contractor, or what's their relationship to your organization?
Sure. So the decision that we made there is our current, and I showed it in the portfolio, the current environmental experts, who, by the way, I would say are equally or greater qualified of the folks that we hired for redundancy, GTA. So GTA works directly for us. And in the premise of having redundancy and also being able to question our own team, which is really important, under that premise, which is just like an operational 101, I purposely put that expert under the payroll of our general contractor, because what that enables is that enables folks like GTA to be ultra critical of the general contractor without fear of retribution, because that's who they work for, and then vice versa. This person being under the payroll of general contractor and will not be at retribution as closely by working directly for us. And that was by design, not because of a preferred outsource perspective.
Hear me or see me or vote. My name is Ann Garnett. I'm a longtime resident of Adamstown. I moved into Buckingham's Choice as I got older. So I'm really a longtime resident. I'm going to probably live a long time. And I hear what you're doing in terms of the problem about water, but I have several questions. One of which is that you talk about where the water's coming from to cool your data centers, and you talk about the electrical, and you haven't mentioned anything about the amount of noise that comes out of them. I live about 2 miles now. I lived closer when I lived in Adamstown. I live about 2 miles, and from what I've heard, I can't get information from anybody in regards to how much noise one data center puts out, much less the number of community data centers you're creating. In the community data centers, you haven't told us the number you're going to shoot for. So whatever one data center sends out times whatever number you're going to do, I don't want to walk outside of my cottage at Buckingham's Choice and hear your data centers, because that's what I think is going to happen. Yeah. And I have people here who I believe live even closer than I do. So I have a big issue with the county not looking into this before they say, yay, we're having a bunch of data centers, whoopee! It's going to bring money in. I don't know where, because they don't have enough good taxes to tax you all enough. Yeah. So that's an issue, big issue, and I have yet to hear you, because I've been into one of your beginning ones, any issue about the sound. Yeah. That's one. And I do think you're right about using wastewater, but I also don't think, depending on the number of data centers you're putting in, you're going to have enough of that either. Okay? Yep. And again, the county is going to say, yay! But if they take water from me to take care of you, I ain't going to be too happy.
Yeah. So Ann, I first of all, I want to acknowledge that I hear you and I completely recognize you, because I've seen you at the meetings. And I will tell you that my goal is for some of these data centers to come and for you not to be disappointed, because I do recognize you, so I'll say that. Now, to speak to your 2 points, let's first talk about sound. So first of all, to give credit where credit's due to the county. So the county has formed its kind of CDI, or data center regulation workshop or working group, and several of the folks from that group are here today. I've met with 3 of them in separate meetings this week, and what I would say amongst those 2 separate meetings, which interestingly enough, what I'm learning about the workshop is the diversity of people who are in that workshop is pretty vast in this community. So I have optimism there. All of them were talking about sound. And what I'll say is all of them are talking about, what data can we have, which I've been giving a lot of data and will continue. Who can we be talking to from your perspective? We're also looking at other perspectives, beginning to explore who are the right acoustical engineers to talk. So what I would say is sound is an important issue. And this is, I would argue that, so in one of the meetings, we were trying to see where we aligned on issues of things of importance for the county to look at. And those would be like land, where data centers are, renewable energy, ensuring that all the benefits of renewable energy for the industry also is handed down to the community, sound, you know, all of these items that they've talked about. So sound actually ranked in the top 5 of the list. And so what I will say, it's recognized as being important. With what's been approved thus far, I think that the industry is not going to disappoint you. Do I think that there's other ways to look at sound that can make you feel more comfortable? I totally do. And I totally think that's a responsible thing to do. And I agree with you. I think it really makes sense to do that, particularly when you're consolidating data centers in an area. So I do want to acknowledge that, you know, looking at, you know, how sound works, and it's actually much more complex than one data center versus 20 data centers. It's how sound, even in one data center, the sound can bounce off of things, and what happens there. What is the difference between low frequency devices that are decibel related and high frequency devices? So I feel comfortable with the regulation that's in place. I think that there's a lot more interesting things to dive into to answer to your concern. So I just want to give acknowledgement there. And because I'm low on sleep and I've been traveling, your second item that is water. So what I'll tell you is I confidently, I disagree with you. And we'll see, Ann, when I follow up with you in the years to come to see if we fulfilled promises with you, we'll talk about it. And what I'll say is from a water perspective, we have gating factors on water and sewer. And what we're building initially right now is limited to a maximum of like around 1 million gallons per day maximum of water. And understand that water oftentimes is only used in the hottest of environments when outside air won't cool. You know, so that oftentimes that's used less than 10% of the year, by the way. And from a maximum perspective, that's often used once every 50 years because it's an extreme weather event. So what I think you're going to find, and the data supports it, is as systems that use renewable energy become more efficient, as an industry, the ratio of water that's being used evaporating for cooling is actually as a percentage going down. And what you'll find is some of the largest data center operators are committing to zero water use by the 2035 timeframe is one example that I can hear of one. So the trend actually is to get off of water usage because quite frankly, the efficiency of doing so using low-cost renewable energy. So I think that's what's going to happen. But no matter the case, we run into gating factors on water, so that kind of has to happen. Otherwise, there won't be enough water because the county has responsibly limited us in how much we can use. Yeah, thanks, Ann.
Yeah, related to that, I had a couple other questions, but I'm wondering if MDE could comment about the environmental impacts of this facility. That is, has MDE proposed that, for instance, the Maryland Commission on Climate Change look at data centers for these kind of impacts, water, energy use impacts? Because this is just a microcosm, right, of what's going on across the state. Is this on somebody's radar at the state level?
MDE are very concerned about climate change. Okay. Yeah. Normally I can yell loud enough, but let's go for it. I'm Barbara Brown, and I'm with the Maryland Department of the Environment in the Voluntary Cleanup Program, and the program administrator for the land restoration program, I'm also going to introduce as well.
Good evening, I'm Barb Krupp-Yars.
So we deal with issues related to the brownfield redevelopment. But we do know, as you know, Maryland Department of Environment's goal is always protection of the environment and public health, that there is a lot of work groups, concern from the governor, concern from other parts of our administration about climate change that look at that. They look at sea level rise. That is a concern. Whether they've looked at data centers as an entity for their impacts, personally I don't know, but I'm sure that's part of their whole overarching review of environmental issues and building and floodplains and building to make sure that things like sewage treatment plants and other infrastructure facilities are protected from sea level rise. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, another thing that I'll add is I'm not sure if he's in the audience, and I don't mean to put him on the spot, but there's actually some pretty respectable scientists that live in the Frederick County area. So there's a gentleman, Kevin, who actually is doing studies and putting thought into what is the environmental ramifications of, you know, the weather patterns changing of rain, and you know how that directly relates to data centers and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of actually thought leadership in that space in the industry. And what I will, and by the way, there is and just from mainly my past of what I came from, so I used to run global infrastructure at Apple, and so any organizations ranging from the government to the World Economic Forum, we had participated and communicated quite a bit. So there's a lot of studies going on throughout the industry, governments as well. And then in fairness, there's some respected environmental advocates and experts like Kevin, who's local to the county, who's also putting in some of that work. That even in some items holds our feet to the fire, which I think is healthy.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And I would encourage MDE to communicate with the Maryland Commission on Climate Change about this, since you have experience with this now. So I'll skip one of my questions. The second one concerned your sewer line. So I'm wondering if you have some kind of a leak detection system in place for that, because you made the comment that people make mistakes. Well, I was thinking that infrastructure can have mistakes too. So what if you're pumping, for instance, and there's a leak there, and it didn't look to me as though there were monitoring wells along that pipe necessarily. So what happens if it leaks? Is there some kind of a way to tell that it's leaking, or is it going to be totally after the fact that this might be discovered?
Yeah, so to answer that question specifically, I don't know. And so what I think we can do is, you know, I don't know if anyone from the county, this is their system, wants to comment on how they manage that. And we are building against the kind of the county standard and design. But, you know, if no one is here who can comment on that from the county, what I can do is I can get that information and that answer and come back. Unfortunately, this is the weakness of me being the jack of all trades when it comes into that sub-area expertise. Let's let the experts talk about it. So we can come back with an answer on that. I don't know.
So we're going to try and balance microphone and presenter here. So I'm the microphone stand.
My name is Hope Green. I live in Adamstown. I have 3 properties on Mountville Road. And one is a farm, and Tuscarora Creek runs the full length of it. And I didn't know about an environmental covenant, but I do now because I have a copy of it. I didn't know anything was wrong until my creek turned that color on about 5 different days in May. And that was April 12th. And I handed out to some people historical information and a contaminant summary from East Alco that I pulled off the MDE website. It's public information, and I have more copies if anyone's interested, but that's the real issue here, that we were put in harm's way. And I started reading the environmental covenant. Page 2, it's a 243-page document. On page 2, any activity on the property or within the soil management area shall meet the requirements of the site management plan attached as Exhibit D. And I'll get to that in a minute. Page 3, excavation encountering groundwater. When conducting any excavation activities on the property extending to the groundwater table, the property owner shall implement the requirements of a site-specific health and safety plan in accordance with the site management plan to ensure that worker protection measures are met. The encountered groundwater shall be containerized during all dewatering activities at the property and shall be analyzed before disposal. Page 3 of a 243-page document. So Exhibit D was prepared by GTA with a couple of schematics from Rogers. How could you have missed that? And you say all these protections are being put in place going forward, but how do we trust you if you missed this on page 2 and 3 and GTA wrote the site management plan embedded in the environmental covenant? You don't have to answer.
I'll answer.
That's different.
Well, I say you don't have to. The other
He'd like to, and I think it might be the courteous thing to do it to at least give him the chance to respond.
Yeah. So I think that the experts that weren't us, I think, confirm that we didn't put you in harm's way. If there is any risk of potentially any numerical amount of risk of potentiality of doing so is one of the reasons we put up the signs in hope also to recognize we know you well, we know the concerns, we know you voice your concerns when we're putting the signs up even. So again, I hear you. And relative to the creek, I notice when I spend time and I walk the creek, because it's nice to do, I do notice that the creek changes colors. And again, I think this goes back to the previous recommendation of, being able to demonstrate with routine updates and information that what could have potentially, what didn't, or what would contribute to those kind of things. And I think we can step up as we've added resources to that. Now, in regards to some of the outfits that you mentioned that were involved in creating that, that's one of the reasons that we hired people, because we viewed them as the most experienced, the most knowledgeable, and the best. And again, when it goes into things, when you look at, we hired multiple of the best, and those best work for us. But again, the best collectively as a team, and I'm throwing no stones in the direction of those experts because they're good, but nobody's perfect as a whole. And again, the way to plug that hole is to add more experts to be able to provide another secondary eye on everything. And so that's how I want to answer what you've said, Hope. And everything that you're reading there, I recognize and you know, everything that I presented here, I humbly accept.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, I'm concerned about your influences on adjacent landowners. There's a farm between me, my farm, and the Quantum site. I've known the farmer my whole life. And when I started seeing issues like aquatic life in my creek disappearing, I asked the owner of the farm between us, a longtime friend and neighbor, if I could walk her creek to look for aquatic life, because I was concerned. The reply she gave me was basically no, but that she had called her insurance company and her agent advised her against it. You can walk to the edge of her property and look onto your site. I feel that maybe she was influenced by you to not let friends and neighbors on her property for that reason. The other thing is St. Joe's Church. I was told that you gave them a gift of $100,000 and a piece of land back there. And I was wondering if that was because Miss Seppi of the planning board, who's a parishioner, or were you just being a good and generous neighbor?
So look, I'm going to intervene. That's an issue I would urge you to take up as a personal matter, but to ask a question in a chamber-sponsored public forum that embedded in the question is a potential allegation, ethics allegation against a sitting member of the Planning Commission. I feel like that's something I think you should pursue as an individual, and there are legal ways for you to do that. This forum probably is not that path. That's okay. No, you don't need to apologize. I don't know, Scott, if you want to, and that's the Ethics Commission through Frederick County. If you go to the Frederick County webpage, you can find the information for how to file an ethics complaint, and I would urge you to do that. I just didn't feel like tonight was the right venue. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah. I didn't know if you wanted to respond to any of that, or
Yeah,
but not the issue that I intervened on.
All that I'll respond is I disagree with all of that, and what I will acknowledge, because it has been completely publicly acknowledged, is when I said that one of our next community meetings, actually for Adamstown, you're welcome to come, Hope, is going to be at Carrollton Manor, which is the house we're responsible for, that sat not in disrepair, but just kind of dirty a little bit, and we just recently cleaned it up. And you know, we're a startup company. We didn't put a huge amount of money in it, but it's looking like really nice, and it's part of our nation's history. And part of that nation's history is Charles Carroll, who's the owner of, whose family was owner of that land, as well as that house, funded the creation of that church. And I'm going to speak personally for a second as a member who's involved, who's a history geek. There was nothing better to be a good neighbor than to contribute to things that ensure the restoration and the preservation of that original chapel that was created by the people on our house that we're responsible for continuing the positive aspects of that legacy. So what I will say, when you dive into that, it is me to take accountability. That felt good about making that donation. We made it perfectly public. We think it underlines and supports the culture of this community, and I feel pretty proud of it, and I completely disagree with what you're saying. So thank you, Hope. And again, just like I said before, you're a neighbor. The other neighbor that you're referring to, I completely disagree with what you're saying, because that neighbor, when we communicate with her, they bring up concerns to us, and just like we try to address your concerns and over the long term hope to be right in your eyes, we feel the same against that neighbor. And those are the only conversations that we have in that regard. So I'm sorry that you feel that way.
It's been mentioned about some of the issues and concerns, noise and energy, and you've mentioned renewable energy a number of times. Can you speak briefly to how you plan to power the facilities with renewable energy, but actually ensure that it's additional renewable energy and not just Rex on paper that is something already built?
So that's interesting, and when I speak here, I've been a long time builder of data centers, so make no mistake, I'm qualified to comment on it. In this case here, in my role in Quantum Loophole, we're not building data centers, so I just want to be like ultra transparent in that. But what I'll say is I'll say several things on this. So the procurement of renewable energy capacity via power purchase agreement is incredibly common, and quite frankly is often the only mechanism to receive renewable energy on a site, particularly a site like this, that you don't want. And by the way, I do know this from digging into the history. I think through past actions and efforts on the site, the community made it perfectly clear they didn't want it to be, massive solar fields and so on and so forth. So what I would say is the feasibility of enabling that generation on site probably isn't a good match. And as an industry, it's very common. Like, I won't mention the cloud player's name, but some of it is public information where the #1 purchaser of renewable energy capacity is a top 3 cloud computing player in the Pacific Northwest, and they pay really in those power purchase agreements between 2.7, 3.8 cents a kilowatt hour for 100% renewable energy. And so that is a typical way the industry procures that, and that energy does flow over the grid. And so what I have brought up before is if we're bringing in an industry that is making massive investment, and that's confirmed, we're making many millions of investments, and we're just starting in the grid and in the utility infrastructure of this region. And the intention of that is to bring more ready availability of reliable 100% renewable energy at that kind of low cost. I think all of us in the room at Citizens can say, I wish my 100% renewable energy was at that cost. And that's where I think that there is potentials to do good things of taking advantage of this infrastructure that enables the industry to get those low costs that can enable people in the community. I think that's a special opportunity in addition to modernization of the grid.
Another question from Councilman McKay.
Thank you. So one of the things that I definitely want to ask you to address, perhaps MDE if they're willing, from a scientific perspective, you took water samples in late May, and my question is, how confident can you be that those samples are an accurate representation of the water that was encountered and released 1 month, perhaps even 2 months previous? We asked MDE about public health concerns, and their response was a forward-looking statement. And I'll quote, MDE does not believe there are public health or environmental concerns since the work has been halted and monitoring is taking place. I think what a lot of people want to know is, how confident can you be about any public health issue for the months prior to those samples and that water that was released?
Yeah, I think that relative to answering that to the public, I think that MDE, the county health department, are really the experts that should comment to the community on that. The only thing that I will say is And it's, you know, we have these charts that demonstrate, you know, where things like, you know, fluoride levels have been over the years, and seeing the action and the positive of remediation of those numbers have come down over those year periods. That as well as just experience on other sites where the similar results have been seen, that makes me a believer and confident in that scenario. The other thing from our perspective, which, you know, we're not the experts here, so we shouldn't be providing the guidance, is we're pretty pleased that, you know, groundwater sampling, you know, from the point closest to where we were doing our work, that was taken in September before it occurred. When you look at the sampling that was taken closest to the area after the fact, was pretty similar, which instills some confidence. But that's just us, and that's what makes us feel good. We're not the experts in the area, and so what I would say is that's what makes us feel better. What's really going to make me feel more better is not is getting through this incident, making investments like we're already doing to take things to an even higher level to make sure that this never happens again. That's, you know, again, to go back to our mission, and I've stated it all along, we're here to transform a dirty history into a respectable future that's acknowledged globally, and this is not a good step to get there. So our interests are the same in that regard.
Hi, I'm Sam Fadul. I own about 500 acres in Frederick County, about 300 of which are pretty close to you guys.
Hi, Sam.
And I actually lived through the first round of data centers being built in Loudoun County, where I'm originally from. But I've lived in Maryland by choice for the last 20 years. One of the common themes I see with a lot of the questions here, and I sympathize greatly with them, is a fear of the unknown. And part of that is our industry is very unknown. It's something that's clandestine by nature, especially in the capital region, because the end users typically are federal agencies. And there's a lot of lack of understanding and a lack of transparency about the benefits they can bring and the harms that did exist in the past, but technology has often mitigated. Would you guys be open to hosting a forum that would dedicate itself to solely addressing what previous historical issues with data centers are, how some of those issues have been remediated in general, and most importantly, what the benefits are to the community and how they are going to enhance people's lives and clear up some of the misconceptions about what some of the potential dangers are?
Yeah, and so what's interesting on this one, and we have to be sure as a team to like capture what we're going to talk about in the next community meeting, because just today I had a phone call that almost made me late here because it got pretty deep with one of the data center workshop group. I see Renee in the audience. One of the data center workshop groups who's been more one of the more challenging people and one of the more critical people on data centers. And he said, you know, being able to get in front of the community and re-articulate and better articulate. He didn't think that we've done a good enough job of what are the benefits that are going to come to the community. And yes, I said that that's a major topic to talk about in the coming session. And so relative to that, the answer is yes, we would be happy to. What I can say is and it's interesting, I made the mistake in the county council meeting of referring to someone who actually I recently met with and is a heck of a good guy. And what I did in the county council is I said opposition, and I used this quote, and the reality was maybe I was a little nervous and I couldn't think of a better word, so I used the air quotes. And he's a good guy. He said, I'm not your opposition, and I realized that, you know, that's my ego speaking. That's he's just saying harsh things, and he's critical. And when I listen to Ann and I listen to Hope, I began my career as a software engineer, and I got into data centers because I kind of knew data centers were going to grow. We had no idea how much growth has happened in this industry. And I came into this industry to make a meaningful difference as a technologist, to innovate things like the early use of outside-air economization in data centers, that cut the energy use of traditional air conditioning systems multifold. That now is, and again, a lot of people contribute to this, is a standard amongst all the big players. So a lot of the concerns I acknowledge, and we have to get better. And that's the purpose of technologists, is to make everything better. Challenges are opportunities, and that's how we get better. So I would be super happy to participate in any of that, and I appreciate your feedback there, Sam. Thank you.
Last call. Okay, let me go this way, and then, ma'am, I'll get you as soon as I grab him.
Oh, thank you, Scott. You all are in a bit of a trust deficit right now, and I think legitimately so. It is not helpful, and I think I want to give you an opportunity to clarify your comment here. When you say that you never put the community in danger, I don't think that's accurate. Nobody knew what was in the water that was going down Tuscarora Creek. And nobody knew until well after the dewatering was done. Mr. McKay was alluding to this earlier. Essentially, you're the car that sped way above the speed limit through a neighborhood, and you didn't kill anybody, but you still put everybody at risk. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff has been found in the soil and the groundwater at that site in the past, and anybody who deals with anything underground will explain at great length, until you put a shovel in the ground, you don't know what's there. The water that you dewatered is different than the water that was present at the end of the dewatering. It's different than the water that's present in the surrounding monitoring wells. If you could just rely on monitoring wells, the environmental covenant would not say water must be tested before release. They'd say go with the slope of the line of chlorine fluorine contamination. That isn't what it says. And so I want to give you an opportunity. I mean, part of this, if you have a trust deficit and you go out of your way to minimize the transgression. I mean, this was a wonderful presentation, but being told water flows downhill doesn't address the concern about what happened. And the more you can go, if you want to revise your statement on that, what you can do for the community is not just say, we did wrong, sorry, we won't do it again. They want to know that you're really owning up to it and that you really have procedures in place that will not just prevent another dewatering, but the next thing that we all aren't even thinking of right now that might come out of your development work there.
Yeah. So what I'll say, Steve, is I disagree, but at the same time, what I will say is, while I can't speculate that we put the community in danger, or anyone put the community in danger related to this incident, at any sign of the potential of doing so, we took immediate action and immediate ownership and accountability by putting those signs up. Now going forward, everything that we can do to avoid that, which is incredibly damaging to everyone, is what I can commit to. But relative to that speculation, I don't agree with that. At the end of the day, that's not for me to determine. That's for unbiased. You could argue that I have bias. I could understand if you said that. But that's for the unbiased folks who are the experts to determine. So that's what I have to say on that. But I appreciate that feedback, and I understand your point.
Okay. I just want to go back to you're capturing the water in these big, large tanks now. How long is the water kept in the container, and how is it released back out into the groundwater? And just a note about the lady who was talking about the creek turning colors. Could that be because of erosion, because of the release of the water?
Yeah. So a couple things, and the real answer, to be like ultra clear, is right now we're you know, when I refer to like containerization and characterization, I'm actually living in the past, because that was the environmental management plan that we don't have right now. So we're not doing anything right now. And so to be ultra clear, that's the case. Now, what I would state is I can underline that whatever we're going to be asked to do in precise means, and it's going to be our interests. And it's interesting because Mrs. Green had, someone had mentioned that, you know, GTA had written, and we're going to be working closely with our partners and regulators at the state level to clearly define exactly what we need to do, and we're going to do exactly that. So to be clear, while I've stated that we understand containerization and characterization, the exact protocol of how we do that and the stringent levels that may actually and likely will get stricter is exactly what we're going to do, and that's still to be determined, and that's what we're going to follow. Yeah, so that answer, so what the fracking that's being used is to capture water in the piping system. And so I don't believe, and I could be incorrect, so let me come back to you with an answer, but we have not released any of that water, obviously, to the ground. And so that is one thing that I know for certain. But relative to the details of, you know, quantities and everything like that, that's changing on the day-to-day. And so, you know, if you like, we can come back with a better answer that I'm not capable of giving you right now.
Scott, when do you think you're going to do the next public community meeting?
Helen, you want to get on the schedule right now? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So what I would say is I would be comfortable, and as a matter of fact, I was going to speak to Hood College about this. If we wanted to do this, say, a month from now in the same spot here, like I said, I really appreciate Hood College, and by the way, from a Chamber of Commerce perspective, I would be super happy to do that. So like I said, I place soft guardrails because we haven't talked yet, but let's do it later this summer, and we're already deeper in the summer. If you'll accommodate us, I appreciate it.
I did want to mention, Pat Murray was here. Nan Mann, who I introduced early on, is with us on behalf of Senator Van Hollen. The reason I mentioned Pat Murray on County Executive Fitzwater's staff is some of you, I know, I recognize who you are, so I know you're serving on that work group. Those of you with an opinion should express that opinion. So here's one thing I can tell you. If you email a member of the county council, they will respond to your email. If you email the county executive on this topic, she will respond, or have senior staff. Shannon is with us. Shannon runs environmental programs for the county government. So take advantage of those communications. I know Senator Lewis Young responds directly and personally to outreach from citizens. That's true of all of our state legislators, those that represent the district that all of you live in, I know because I used to. They will respond to your email. So please don't consider this to be, oh, MC Keegan-Air is here. Yep, I'm sorry, we didn't recognize you earlier. Councilmember MC Keegan-Air is also here. And I promise you, she will respond, because she has responded to emails of mine after midnight. I don't know how the woman functions, but she does. So on behalf of Hood, we are committed to continuing this dialogue. As I said at the outset, We were happy to invite people to come here to celebrate good news. It's not that I'm happy that we're here to discuss something that's more challenging, but I think it's an absolute obligation that we have. I appreciate Scott and the Quantum team for being willing to be here to address these issues. And I would love to do this again. And what I would suggest is maybe we think about the next one, a bifurcated conversation. Start out with, so here is what's happened on site since the last time we met. And then the second half, an announcement about some very exciting future plans that speak to the potential for this project that we all so enthusiastically celebrated early on with the presence of Rowan and some other, I think, really important and cool things that are going to happen in the future. But following a conversation that catches us up to current time based on where we are here tonight. So we'd love to work with your team to make that happen. And I know I speak on behalf of Dr. Chaplain, Dr. Ricker, and Helen that the Chamber Hood team will be happy to help facilitate that. I deeply appreciate and respect that you all are here. The reason we did the live stream through the Chamber's channel is because if you work in the DC metro area and you live in Adamstown, getting to Hood College at 5:30 in the evening is a serious challenge. If we continue to do these things, we will continue to put them on our YouTube channel for all those people who don't get a chance to be here, and we'll provide a feedback mechanism to gather input, like I said, from people who don't feel as comfortable getting up on a microphone as some of you do, and I applaud those of you who did. But we see this as a continuing dialogue on behalf of the business community, on behalf of the nonprofit community, but also on behalf of you people who will be directly affected by this project. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to the QL team, and thank you to Hood College for co-hosting. Thank you all.